welcome to my podcast. I begin every podcast with a bowl so that we can connect, find our center, and receive the insight from the podcast. Hello and welcome to my next podcast. In this podcast, I want to share with you how I recently, in fact, Saturday night for the winter solstice, I did a death ceremony. I'd never heard of a death ceremony before, and I thought that death ceremonies only happened when somebody died. And I realized that in relationships, through breakups or betrayals, or you're just not on the same path anymore, there's a death that occurs, and there's a grieving process that needs to be had, and there's wounds that need to be healed in order for us to move forward. And I never understood the significance of that until the weekend, because until we give ourselves the time to acknowledge, heal the wounds, allow the grief to come to the surface, allow ourselves to be treated how we would have been treated as a child if we had the care to heal the wound, and to deal with the discomfort and the pain, and then to clean it up, and then to rest it, and then to protect it, and then allow it to heal properly, then it's going to be an open wound. And I thought to myself that when I imagined a wound would be something big, right? Like a big gaping, ulcerating wound. But it's not. It could be a paper cut. And we all know how much paper cuts hurt. And if you continually hit that paper cut, it's just as bad as a big gaping wound. So I realized I had a new client come to see me, and he was the reflection and the embodiment of a man who I'd had a really challenging relationship with. It was shrouded with things that were not good for me. And it brought up some shock. And I actually had to ask the client to leave, and I refunded his money, because it was like the embodiment of this man in my room. It was actually the most incredible catalyst for me, an incredibly defining moment where I was able to say no and to ask him to leave, whereas 10, 15, 20 years ago, more than that, 20 years ago, I didn't have the courage, 25 years ago, to ask him to leave. I kept looking beyond the red flags and connecting with his heart, and every time he'd hook me back in, I'd go back in, and then I wouldn't look at the red flags that were continuously happening. And what it all stemmed down to was my own self-worth and my hunger for love and acceptance. And so that hunger for love and acceptance made me connect to a man that was really unhealthy for me in so many ways. There was dishonesty, there was betrayal, there was abuse. So many things that were so wrong. So I went through my shock and it stayed with me. And I spoke to Gillian, who is an expert in death. And she suggested I do a death ceremony. And I said, well, how would I do that? She said, well, you need to write a eulogy. A eulogy for that relationship. And you need to express the good and the bad of the relationship. And then at the end, have gratitude for the relationship, but express what you want to let go of and what you no longer will accept in your life, in relationships. So I started to write, and it just came out of me like a freight train. It's really interesting. When I sit to write a book, I have to think about it, and I'll get to a few pages and then I'll go, okay, I'll take a break and then I'll come back to it. But this letter was like a freight train. It just came and it just came and it just came. And I allowed it without thinking. I just allowed the words to come to paper. It was like I finally got to say what I needed to say. I finally got to express what I needed to express. I finally got to say the things about myself and shed light on the reasons why I made the decisions that I did, and then looking back on them now from a much wiser place and a much stronger place, and giving myself compassion, but also feeling the disgust and allowing that disgust to come to the surface. And then the last word that I wrote, actually before I even wrote the last word, as I got to the third and fourth page of the letter, there were other people that came into my life or into my awareness that I wanted to write on that death ceremony as well. And I decided in that moment that these were not the people or the energies that I wanted to deal with anymore. I don't want them in my life anymore. I don't have to have them in my life anymore. And somewhere there is an innocent child. I saw love in everybody, and there is love in everybody. But the story between heart to heart and love to love, in the middle there can be a lot of story that is destructive. That no matter how much you love somebody, you can't break through it. You can't help them through it. They have to help themselves through it. And I no longer will sacrifice myself for the betterment of somebody else. And so this is around my self-worth, which is what some of my last podcasts have been about, discovering my own self-worth and that I am valuable, but I had to value myself first. I had to value myself above and beyond, which took me a long time to learn. So at the end of this letter I wrote, I am free, you are free, I love you. Because aside from all of the disaster, there was love. But the relationship is now deceased. So I went outside in the dark, under the stars. I lit a candle. Before I did that, I chose a song, and I sat with the letter while I listened to this song. And then with a little torch on my head, I read the letter out loud to my partner, and I asked him before I read it that he hear me, but not use any of the information in the letter as ammunition against me, and to understand that it's about me letting go. And he understood. I think it was more important for me to say that, as it was very deep. So I read the letter, and I allowed the tears and the runny snot to come. And then I burnt it. And then I sat in silence. And I allowed it to rest. For the next few days, I started to feel the false sense of safety that I had created in my body. And I started to feel the bracing. And I realized in order for me to feel genuinely safe, I needed to let go of the false sense of safety in my body to allow my real sense of safety to come through. I needed the real story to come through, rather than the one that I had created throughout that relationship while I was in shock for such a long time. And during the process of letting go of my false sense of safety, it is painful. It's a really uncomfortable feeling in your body. I felt like my face was falling off and changing, and I had pain in my legs and my muscles and my hips. And then I'd sporadically bring to the surface the pain that I was feeling. And then I realized that I'm just letting the heat off. I'm just expressing, I can't handle this. And then I'd go back to, I can handle this. And so I'm still on the process, but I understand the importance of how our body is formed due to a trauma in the past, or a lengthy period of time that our nervous system is unstable, and we don't realize it because our body goes into this magical form of a sense of safety, even if it is not safety. And usually we jump into our minds to control the situation the best we can, because somewhere there I didn't think I had a way out, but we always have a way out. So I wanted to share that, and I was provoked a little by one of my clients who said, you haven't done a podcast for a while, and I wanted to share that. Yeah, so I've released all abusive, dictatorship, predatory, sexually abusive relationships, dominant relationships from my life. Yeah. And I only ask for healthy relationships. I hope this has resonated for some of you. I thank you for listening, and until my next podcast, bye for now.